Hello, I'm Biko Scala. This is number 0817, the Stuff File program, with Peter Anthony Holder, and it comes to you right now.
The following program is brought to you in living color.
Now, it's time for an eclectic mix of interviews and some of the oddest news stories you'll ever hear. It's the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder.
Hey there, hi there, ho there! Peter Anthony Holder here with you, and yes, this is indeed another edition of the Stuff File program, number 0817. And coming up on this edition of the Stuff File program, you'll meet Aaron LaPedis, who is the garage sale millionaire. He's written the book, How to Become a Garage Sale Millionaire. Why did he write the book?
I had a lot of people asking for my advice because they had a parent that was going in a new nursing home, a relative that passed away, and they need to liquidate the stuff in their house. And then I started to help so many people, I realized maybe this is the thing. And I was very successful with garage sales and estate sales. And then it came to light that I'll write a book and I'll be able to help many, not one at a time. And my first book was a bestseller. Bill Williams is the author of 20 Years of Internet Humor and Other Interesting Things. He started this venture just to get his employees to read their emails.
You have to put yourself back in the 1990s when email was something new, so was the internet. Most people, particularly the sales folks, if they wanted to keep in touch, they carried a pager, a pocket full of quarters, and looked for a payphone if they needed to return a call. And so I knew they weren't paying attention because I could send things out and nobody would ever respond. I knew it was successful in getting people to read their emails. It was also successful in getting other attention because the sales staff would share some of these funny things with their prospects and clients, and they made more sales that way.
Marc Hartzman, the curator of WeirdHistorian.com, is back with the weird story for the month of April. This time, it's the Great Airship Flap.
This story is from April of 1897, just about 6 years before the Wright brothers first flew. And this was a story that took place in Aurora, Texas, where it was believed the Martian airship had crashed and a Martian body had been found and then buried. But let me back up just a little bit before that. This is actually part of a broader story of airships that was called the Great Airship Flap of 1896 and 1897, which started in November of 1896 with some sightings around the San Francisco Bay Area and Sacramento of these strange airships just flying by.
And there's lots and lots of Stuff File news, dad joke theater, morning shower thoughts, and, of course, an idiot of the day. The guest later, the person who told you this was show number 0817, was Biko Scala, who is the broadcast entertainer for the hot minor league baseball team, the Savannah Bananas. He was on show number 0755, which you can go back and listen to. I also urge you to check out the plethora of trick plays that the team has video of all over social media. It's a hoot to watch. You'll find the link to the Savannah Bananas just by going to the show that Biko mentioned. And thank you very much, Biko, for doing the guest slate on this edition of the Stuff File program, a show that is listener-supported, fan-funded radio that depends on you for our success. Join us at patreon.com to help make this show an even bigger and better radio experience. Well, let's get right to the stuff. A 70-year-old Missouri woman who has fostered over 200 children has been accused of trading a child for an exotic monkey. The child's age is unclear, but she is likely a teenager under 17 years of age. Lincoln County Sheriff Rick Harrell said his office would not comment, but it was confirmed that a handful of monkeys were found at the suspect's house. Said Lincoln County Prosecutor Mike Wood, "It was described to me early on as that the defendant here became frustrated with this individual child and asked her friend in Texas if she would just take the child. We will have to further investigate whether that was actually a trade for a child or if it was something that does not rise to the level of any type of trafficking." Well, She gave up the child over state lines and got a monkey. That sounds like trafficking to me. A Chinese man developed a lung infection after habitually sniffing his own dirty socks. The unnamed patient was admitted to the Southwest Hospital of the Army Medical University with a cough that turned out to be an Aspergillus infection. After doctors questioned the patient, they discovered that he had a habit of smelling his own dirty socks. Upon examining the socks, medical professionals found traces of the fungus. Worn socks can contain sweat, salt, fungus, and bacteria that, when inhaled, could increase health risks. Well, this guy is probably a fan of You Don't Mess with the Zohan.
Smell it, smell it, smell it. Now take it. That's for you.
And finally, in this section of Stuff File News, before we get to our first guest here on this edition of the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder.
Greetings, passengers, to another Stuff File program installment of Idiots in Flight. This is the pre-boarding announcement. We are now inviting those passengers who are complete half-wits to begin boarding at this time. Thank you.
An American Airlines flight was forced to turn around after a disruptive passenger began to frighten other passengers on the way from New York to Milan. He even tried to get into the cockpit. American Airlines Flight 198 departed from JFK International Airport around 7 p.m. on April the 7th. 4 hours into an 8-hour journey, the crew announced that the plane would be heading back to New York. The decision to return came after one passenger became angry because he didn't receive his preferred meal. He was also informed that he couldn't sit in an exit row with a baby. After the plane was rerouted, it landed safely at JFK at 3:30 a.m. The passengers left again on Tuesday at around 11 a.m., 16 hours after their initial takeoff. According to police, the man was released without criminal charges. That's the part that seems baffling to me. What also baffles me is the way the airline eventually treated the other passengers. The airline did not accommodate passengers once they returned, staying overnight at the airport while they were waiting to depart once again. One passenger asked to use the American Airlines lounge to breastfeed and change. They said you could go in if you pay $79. The FAA is investigating the incident. So, if you're keeping score, it's tied at 1 apiece with one unruly passenger and one poor airline response. But we have another story that I think clearly makes the airline the loser. Police escorted an English woman off a Ryanair flight after she was unable to pay for a Pringles snack on her flight to Bristol. Anne-Marie Murray claims her card didn't work, and while she offered to pay in cash for the chips, the flight staff couldn't receive cash payments. Said Murray, "I was shocked when the police came on board and we were asked to leave. It was so embarrassing. Luckily, the police were lovely, and after I explained the situation, they took me to a cash machine and I was able to pay." Murray says she's now banned from flying with Ryanair, but wouldn't want to fly with them again after the incident anyway. Yep, I have to agree with Anne-Marie. Sometimes the idiots in the sky are the airlines themselves.
Here's a warning to some passengers. The air marshals are getting creative. For most of the flight, you might have zip-tied limbs and you may be duct-taped in an overhead bin until your diverted destination. But the Stuff File program appreciates you. Thank you.
And let's get to our first guest here in this edition of the Stuff File program, shall we? Downsizing and decluttering can be overwhelming, but what if you could turn the painful process into a money-making operation? Aaron LaPedis is the garage sale millionaire. He's also the author of How to Become a Garage Sale Millionaire. Aaron joins us via Zoom from Denver, Colorado. Hi, Aaron.
How's it going, Peter?
Jess Tickety-Boo, thanks very much for being on the program with us. Now, I understand by going through your story that you started this at a very early age, the idea of being an entrepreneur. So, in your estimation, are entrepreneurs made or are they born?
Great question, Peter. For me, I think it was that I was born this way. I have a love, for money and the art of the deal, but it's not so much to show a lot of wealth, but to make money for me is entertaining. It's exciting. It drives me. And it happened, when I was 9, and it drives me today. And a lot of people, if you don't have that drive built in, it is hard to find it, acknowledge it, and deal with it.
So are you saying that it's not necessarily the money aspect of it, but you enjoy, for lack of a better term, the hunt?
Exactly. Because at the end of the day, my wife and I are very generous to charities, and we don't showboat. I like nice things, but it's not about to show off. It's about truly, it's the hunt and accomplishing, getting what I'm looking for, and realizing I'll make money when I sell it.
So again, you were very successful at a young age. You became a millionaire when you were 21 or by 21. And I'm just curious to know, I mean, you've written the book, How to Become a Garage Sale Millionaire. At what point did you decide you need to share this information with other people who can do the same thing that you did?
I had a lot of people asking for my advice because they had a parent that was going in a new nursing home, a relative that passed away, and they need to liquidate the stuff in their house. And they knew I was very, very good at it. And then I started to help so many people, I realized maybe this is the thing. And I was very successful with garage sales and estate sales. And I took all that money and started my business, which was an art gallery. And then it came to light that I'll write a book and I'll be able to help many, not one at a time. And my first book was a bestseller.
Now, it's interesting that, again, we're talking about garage sales here. We as a population generally collect things. Some collect things more than others. Some of us may be even hoarders. But at what point do you have to say, I need to get rid of this stuff? And also, if I'm trying to sell it, I can't necessarily put in my emotional respect for whatever that particular thing is. Otherwise, I'm going to be insulted by any price I get. So how do you divorce yourself from that aspect, business-wise?
Great question. So anytime I'm planning to sell it, I realize when that thing leaves that drawer, that closet, that garage, I don't need it anymore. I just mentally detach myself from it. And that's why a lot of times people, when they do that, they don't want to see it again. So when it's on their, stoop, their front lawn, it's when I advise them, those people don't want that anymore. So I also advise not only get to a garage sale early to get the good deals, but at the end of the day, go back to that same garage sale because they don't want those things back in their house because they have detached any emotion for it. And you just have to mentally believe if you haven't used that item, put on that t-shirt, used 6 hammers at once, you don't need them. And you have to just detach, and your family needs to just know that you don't have the room to keep on glorifying your idea that more is better.
Nowadays, it's not just simply a garage sale. I mean, that's a euphemism we use for selling things that are secondhand. But nowadays, you don't necessarily walk down the street and go to somebody's garage. There are so many online places that people can sell their wares to. From that perspective, what are your concerns and what should people be concerned about? Because for every person out there who wants to get a good bargain or sell a good bargain, there's somebody else out there who's a scam artist.
Peter, very good point. We have things like Craigslist, uh, Nextdoor Marketplace, Facebook Marketplace. And when you put ads on these platforms, you're always going to have somebody that wants to part you away from your hard-earned money. And some of the biggest things are, I can't pick it up now, but I'll give you, I'll have somebody come to your house and pick it up for me and give you a certified check. And I'm going to put more money in the certified check than what that item is for. And you keep it, the extra money as an inconvenience fee. The other extra cash that I'm going to put in is for the person who's picking up that item. And then your greedy side goes, wow, I'm going to get more for the item. And then you find out that certified check you put in your bank account is worthless. There are so many of those scams. Or Facebook, where somebody clones a friend of yours Facebook account and they're selling items. And you're saying, oh, my God, Joe Bob has all these great items. I trust Joe and I'm going to buy them. And what you find out is that you pay them over PayPal using a fictitious PayPal account because it's letters and numbers. And then when you go and ask to pick it up, you find out either the real Joe Bob tells you that was a clone site, or it all disappears. And those are the kind of the biggest scams these days, but there's so many more, Peter.
So how do you protect yourself from them?
I always start out with believing if the deal is too good, it's probably not real. Because so many people, Peter, these days are actually able to go on eBay and search and find out what the true value is. Or they go on to past online auctions. And that's what would put up my spidey sense to realize it may not be a great deal. And if it's a great deal, I feel good about it, then I'm not going to ever buy anything over the internet unless I am eBay. That platform, you're always protected. So however you pay for it, if it doesn't show up, you just file a claim with eBay and you get your money back. A lot of things with PayPal, if you use PayPal's service under items and not services or friends, you can get your money back on PayPal. So you just have to see. My best way is, Peter, face to face. You hand them cash, or you see the item and you Venmo them the money and take the item. Because these days there are so many scams, it's hard to keep up with.
I would assume that in your business, from the time you were 9 years old until today, that you have had a good eye, meaning that you could sense something that you had of value, or you could sense going out and finding something else that you could resell for value. Is that a natural thing, or is that something that one can learn?
That definitely could be learned. And that is why I wrote the book. So, a lot of the things I've taken many, many years to be an overnight success. And I've probably been at 1,000 garage sales or more. I've looked at, I don't know, 50,000, 100,000 items on eBay. It's just repetition of knowing value and what to look for. Understand if it's a popular item, there's always fakes, to understand where people can hide damage in items. It's just repetition of looking at many things to realize I got this.
You said you took years to, as you say, to become an overnight success. Is that part of the problem that other people have? The fact that they want to become an overnight success, or they think they can do that, and so they either cut corners or don't pay attention because they figure that's the route they need to be on?
100%. Somebody, they will say, after a couple garage sales, I got this. I don't need to read any books on this because I know it all by looking at a couple blogs. Then that is the kind of idea, the frame of mind that's going to get you to lose a lot of your money really, really quick. pulling the trigger really quick. Oh God, this is a great deal. Buy it, get it home, do your research, realize it's either a fake, you overpaid for it, or it wasn't exactly what you thought it was. So that's why I recommend doing the work before you spend your hard-earned money.
We've looked at this from the advance or the side of someone selling or getting rid of stuff in a garage sale that they have owned over a period of time, and they just want to get rid of it and make some money on the side. But let's look at the buyer. In your estimation, a percentage of the buyers, how much of a percentage is people who want to buy the stuff because they like the stuff and they want to make it their own? Or how many people are out there looking at stuff because they think they can resell it for an even bigger price?
I think it actually is 50-50. I have a lot of people that I sell to that you can kind of tell they're buying it for their own satisfaction. They want to put it on the wall or something like that. But with eBay, you can always tell that it could be another store, or they have a client looking for what you have in their eBay title. For mine, it's the garage sale millionaire. So if any of your people look at, can go to my eBay site, the garage sale millionaire, they can see everything I sell and what I'm buying and how I describe it. But it kind of tells you that I'm going to garage sales and I'm buying stuff to flip it. And if you see that in the title, you kind of know they're buyers and they're buying it for a client. But I would say easy 50-50 on people wanting it for themselves or wanting it to make more money.
Well, congratulations on your success. And more importantly, congratulations on the fact that you have this book out called How to Become a Garage Sale Millionaire, one of many that you have, because it's a boon to people who, especially in this economy, they want to get into some of the business that you are getting into. And everyone, I guess, in their mind thinks, going back to the beginning, that they have some sort of entrepreneurial spirit. So you're the person that is, shall we say, igniting that. So again, congratulations. And thank you very much for taking the time to be on the program with us, sir.
Peter, thank you very much for having me on.
Aaron LaPedis, the garage sale millionaire and the author of How to Become a Garage Sale Millionaire. You can go to our website at thestuffile.com to the page for this show, which is show number 0817, and you'll find the links to Aaron's site, his eBay site, plus links to either Amazon.com or Amazon.ca, where you can order his book directly. You're listening to the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder.
And now, Dad Joke Theater.
When does a joke become a dad joke? When it becomes apparent.
Join us again for another Stuff File program, Dad Joke Theater.
There's still more guests, more news, and an idiot of the day coming your way on the Stuff File program. Stay tuned. The Stuff File program is a listener-supported, fan-funded radio show that depends on you for our success. Join us at patreon.com to help make this show an even bigger and better radio experience. Sign up and find out about our rewards program. Being a patron doesn't have to be a long-term commitment. There's absolutely no obligation. You could join today and end whenever you'd like, but the time we have your support would be so greatly appreciated. We'd also love to hear your thoughts about the show and even your ideas for rewards. Join us for the ride. Join us at patreon.com/The Stuff File program. You're listening to the Stuff File program. It's the choice of 4 out of 5 dentists. The 5th dentist also listens, but that's just because he follows the crowd. Here's Peter Anthony Holder.
And still to come on the program, we'll talk to the author of 20 Years of Internet Humor, plus Marc Hartzman is along with the weird story for the month of April. We also have a morning shower thought and, of course, an idiot of the day coming your way, and much more in Stuff File News right here, right now. In the U.S., the Library of Congress's National Recording Registry has a total of 675 of what it calls the Sounds of America. That number includes the 25 that were recently added. According to the Librarian of Congress, Carla Hayden, in a statement she said, "The National Recording Registry is our evolving nation's playlist honoring audio treasures worthy of preservation. including iconic music across a variety of genres, field recordings, sports history, and even the sounds of our daily lives with technology. That last part is a clue to what I'm getting at. So, what are some of the 25 that were added to the list? Aloha A by the Hawaiian Quintet, Celine Dion's My Heart Will Go On, and the original Broadway cast album of Hamilton. But also included is the Microsoft Windows 95 startup chime. Yes, that's right. The Microsoft Windows 95 startup chime is in the Library of Congress. Future generations will now also be tortured by this, only they won't know why. Yeah. A man identified as Daniel Ciriello was arrested outside an Applebee's in Clearwater, Florida, wearing a pink wig, fake breasts, and a pink thong, causing a disturbance while highly intoxicated. Police found him stumbling in the parking lot, attempting to enter a vehicle that was not his. Ciriello appeared disoriented and could not answer basic questions about his whereabouts. Arrested for disorderly intoxication, he was taken to jail and later released after pleading guilty to the misdemeanor charge with fines totaling $570. What I would like to know is, did he get drunk, then put on the pink wig, fake breasts, and pink thong? Or did he get drunk while in the pink wig, fake breasts, and pink thong? There is a difference here. Anyway, also, police records show that Ciriello's home address is near the restaurant, so you know what that means. He's in the neighborhood.
Now at Applebee's. Now that's eating good in the neighborhood.
Well, apparently it depends on what you wear. Anyway, what's in a name? Well, it's a loony coincidence. An alleged serial shoplifter with a bizarre name was arrested and charged with stealing over $20,000 of merchandise from Walmart stores across northern Georgia. 40-year-old Speedy Gonzalez,
you don't catch me,
was accused of placing pricey items into a cheap container at a self-checkout, but only scanning the inexpensive large item without scanning the smaller items hidden inside.
I'm Speedy Gonzalez, the fastest mouse in all Mexico.
He tried to make off with things like nicotine gum and diabetic strips. In other words, high-priced items that are smaller in nature, said Gainesville Police Lieutenant Kevin Holbrook. He would then pick out an item from a shelf, such as a trash can, then take all those items, stick it into the box with the larger item, and then take that, pay for it, and walk out of the store, allowing him to walk away with much more than he paid for. But police caught on to his alleged crimes and arrested him 10 days after another alleged theft in March. It's not Gonzalez's first run-in with the police. In April 2020, he was busted in Gwinnett County for allegedly stealing checks from a mailbox and trying to buy $3,000 worth of items with the funds at a Home Depot. He did live up to his name in that crime, since police took months to arrest him.
You don't catch me.
Well, you do eventually if you're greedy. And finally, in this section of Stuff File News, before we get to our next guest here in this edition of the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder, KFC has introduced a calorie-free and fluoride-free way to satisfy your chicken itch. Fried chicken-flavored toothpaste. The toothpaste flavor is inspired by all of KFC's 11 herbs and spices. It's described as irresistible, coating your teeth in flavor before leaving your mouth feeling fresh and clean. KFC partnered with toothpaste manufacturer Hi Smile to produce the paste for a limited time. It's available only on the Hi Smile website for $13, if it's not already sold out. But wait, there's more. You can also snap up the KFC branded electric toothbrush, which will set you back $59. You know, there are some lazy people out there who brush their teeth with their fingers.
It's a finger-licking Kentucky Fried Chicken, a finger-licking good day.
And let's get to our next guest here in this edition of the Stuff File program. WG Bill Williams has been there and done that. He ran a consulting business in Washington, D.C. for 20 years. Back in the 90s, he started sending out a humorous daily email to get his sales staff to read their emails. And it worked. Decades later, Bill has compiled thousands of these jokes and humorous stories, leading to his most recent book, 20 Years of Internet Humor and Other Interesting Things. Bill joins us via Zoom from Ohio. Hi, Bill.
Hi, Peter. How are you doing today?
Just tickety-boo. Thanks very much for being on the program with us.
Appreciate the opportunity.
First of all, I love the subtitle of the book and other interesting things, and we'll get to that in a moment. But the impetus, the reason why you started this was you were trying to get your sales staff to read their emails. How did you realize, first of all, that they weren't reading their emails?
Well, you have to put yourself back in the 1990s when email was something new, so was the internet. And, most people, particularly the sales folks, if they wanted to keep in touch, they carried a pager, a pocket full of quarters, and looked for a payphone if they needed to return a call. And so I knew they weren't paying attention because I could send things out and nobody would ever respond. So this was just a way of getting their attention, and it worked.
So when did you have the aha moment to send out jokes, and what kind of jokes did you send out?
It was, to start with, just some interesting quotes from history, something humorous when I could think of it. But when I first got started, it wasn't all that regular. I would like to say I did it every day of the week, but let's face it, I had other things going on. And after a while, I got into the swing of things. So after about a year, it was pretty much 5 days a week. And then people started sending me suggestions saying, here's something you might want to use. And I got more and more of those to where I really didn't have to do much thinking. I just pulled one out of the file and there we go. Of course, I did have to edit it because some of them just weren't all that ready to go.
When you started getting ideas from other people, was that the beginning of your recognition, or did you realize early on that this was successful in at least getting people to read their emails?
Well, I knew it was successful in getting people to read their emails. It was also successful in getting other attention because the sales staff would share some of these funny things with their prospects and clients, and they made more sales that way. And then the clients said, hey, could we get on the list too? And so we added them that way. And like Topsy, it just grew to where today I've got folks all over the country. I've got people in Europe. I've got people in Australia and even India that are getting these things.
Wow. Okay, so again, your book is 20 Years of Internet Humor and Other Interesting Things. What was the first joke that you sent via email? Do you remember?
I don't have a clue. I'm surprised I can remember what day it was that far back. No, I don't have a clue. And, I'd have done it 30 years, but the book says 20 years of internet humor because I didn't start to save these things. And when I started to actually realize, hey, here's a package of stuff, I realized that for the first 10 years, all the computers I used then are so out of date, most of them I don't even have anymore, and the ones I do have, I couldn't pull anything off of them. So my records only go back 20 years instead of 30.
So when did you decide that all of this stuff needed to be in a book?
Couple of years ago when the discourse on TV and everything got so divisive with everybody shouting and screaming and you're wrong and this is the way we should do it and all that sort of stuff, I thought people needed to laugh more. So I took the idea for the book to a publisher and said, this might be a good book. And I was told, no, this wouldn't be a good book. This would be a good series of books. And right now we're looking at 10 to 12 volumes if we get them all out. And then once we're done with that, we can put some specialty volumes together, like one about kids or one about aging or one about golf, okay? Because we've got so much on all those different topics that we could just have a real specialty issue.
What kinds of things are in your book? I do note that one of your most recent books, this one, has things like cat baptisms.
Yes, that was a story about a little 5-year-old boy who was, he had a couple of cats, and his mother heard him talking to them outside the window, and she looked, and there he had them, lined up, and he was preaching to them. He had a church going. And I said, Timmy, what are you doing? And he said, well, these cats are in my church. And then a little bit later, she's heard cats screaming and hollering and whining, and she looked again, and he was dipping them in water. He said, Timmy, what are you doing? He said, well, I'm baptizing them. And she said, well, cats don't like water. And he said, well, they should have thought of that before they joined my church.
You see, I need to know where that kid is today.
Well, like so many kids and individuals in jokes, they probably never existed, but it would be nice to know.
And as far as his mother is concerned, I mean, the child is the light of her eye, so she's probably going along with the baptism route. I live in a darker world. I'm thinking he's trying to drown the cats.
Well, another story for a child just slightly older than that. Jimmy was faced with the fact that his parents told him he had to have a tonsillectomy. And he didn't know all what that was, but he was talking to one of his little buddies and told him that, we have to have this tonsillectomy, or I do. So he went into the hospital, and when he was under anesthetic, his mother said, doctor, he hasn't had a circumcision, so while he's under anesthesia, could you give him a circumcision too? And the doctor agreed. And so when he recovered, he was a little surprised to be sore down there. And it took him a while to recover. A couple of weeks later, he was seeing his little friend again, and he said, I was just told I have to have a tonsillectomy too. What was it like? And he said, well, I've got to tell you, your tonsils aren't where you thought they were.
One of the things you talk about is AADD, which is, I believe, short for Age-Activated Attention Deficit Disorder. What exactly is that? And is it something that I might have?
You may have it. I know I have it for a fact. It's one of those things where, I can be sitting at my desk and say, I need to go get a cup of coffee. And I go out to the kitchen to get a cup of coffee and realize that, well, I hadn't opened that mail on the table. So I start to open the mail. And one of the things is a bill that needs to be paid. So I go looking for my checkbook. On my way to look for the checkbook, I realize that, gee whiz, I need to fix that thing over by the door. And at the end of the day, I haven't gotten the coffee. I haven't written the check. I haven't done any of those things because I just can't keep a thought in my mind long enough to do anything about it.
I remember the late Betty White when she was well into her 90s, and somebody asked her how she is so active and how she can get around so well. And she says, I have a house that's several stories and I have a bad memory.
I can understand that too. You go up to get something and then you get something else and you go back down and, I didn't get what I needed. And so you go back up to get it, and maybe 2 or 3 trips later, you will succeed.
I understand that you've been telling stories forever, and you even told stories to an old college friend.
Oh, I know that story that you're getting to.
Yeah.
I had a friend in college. I was out at Texas Tech, and this friend and I shared a background. Both of our dads were Air Force sergeants, and I actually met Johnny in the Air Force ROTC, and we got along pretty well. And after about a year, we were sitting in the Union, and he said, I'm not all that crazy about school. I think I'm going to drop out, because he was a musician, was a good guitar player, and played around campus. I said, well, what are you going to do? He said, well, I heard that the Mitchell Trio, California, was looking for a replacement, and I thought I'd go out and apply. And I said, Johnny, why don't you stick around and get your degree? That'd be worth it. And he said, no, I think I'm going to go. So he disappeared. He went out to California and got the job with the Mitchell Trio. And next thing I heard, he'd changed his name from Johnny Dutchendorf to John Denver. And so my advice to stay in school and get your degree was probably one of my all-time worst pieces of advice I could ever have given.
But now you have these books that are out. As you say, you're planning on having many of them. Have you gone beyond the idea of just doing books? Are you doing anything online? Or are you doing maybe a television show or a slideshow? This could be a chicken soup for the soul kind of endeavor where it's doing everything.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned Chicken Soup for the Soul, because Jack Canfield, who's co-author of that, is one of my advisors on this project.
Ah.
He thinks this is going to be a whole series of bestsellers. And in all honesty, there are so many things that I could be doing and that I would like to be doing, that there's just not enough time in the day to get all the things done. So I'm just taking it one step at a time and seeing what we can get done today. And today I'm talking with you, and I think that's a major accomplishment.
Well, the book is called 20 Years of Internet Humor and Other Interesting Things. I didn't get to ask, what are the other interesting things?
Well, people could expect that, just as page after page after page of jokes. And sure, that's the majority of it, but there's a lot of thought things in there, too. Like the story about a 7-year-old boy who was dying of leukemia, what the Phoenix, Arizona Fire Department did to make his last couple days and weeks on Earth, memorable for him and his family. And that was a very popular one. And there are other things like that, too, like a gentleman who was a gardener. Some gang members came by and threatened him, stole stuff from him. And every time they came by, because they kept coming back, he'd offer them a drink of water and not fight with them, but they would beat him up and just make life miserable for him. Eventually, one of those guys came back and said, you have made me so ashamed of my life that here are all the things that we took from you. I kept them, and I wanted you to have them back. And then when the gentleman died, this guy came in and asked the church where he was keeping the garden if he could take his place. And he kept the garden very nice for a couple of years until he went into the pastor's office and said, I'm not going to be able to do it anymore. My wife just had a baby. I'm not going to have enough time. And he said, great, what did you name the baby? He said, I named it after the guy I replaced.
So not only is it humorous, it's influential and inspirational.
Inspirational is my preferred term. And I've got a lot of photos in there, too. Some are just like what it's like to drive in winter back in the 1900s when your car had no heaters, no windows, in many cases, no roofs. It's not a great time to be driving out in the winter. And other things like some pictures of the ceremonies of deceased Canadian and American soldiers coming back from the Middle East during the wars there. Just for Veterans Day, things of that nature.
Well, again, the book is called 20 Years of Internet Humor and Other Interesting Things, and it's a very interesting book. Bill, thank you very much for taking the time to be on the program with us.
Peter, I really appreciate the opportunity, and I hope you have a marvelous day.
WG, or Bill Williams, author of 20 Years of Internet Humor and Other Interesting Things. You can go to our website at thestufffile.com to the page for this show, which is show number 0817, and you'll find the links to Bill's site, plus links to either Amazon.com or Amazon.ca, where you can order his book directly. You're listening to the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder.
Giving you something to think about. This is Morning Shower Thoughts.
When two vegans get into an argument, is it still called a beef?
Morning Shower Thoughts from the Stuff File program.
Got something for the mailbag? Drop Peter a line. He'd love to hear from you. Send your email to mailbag@thestufffile.com. And remember, stuff is spelled S-T-U-P-H. That's mailbag@thestufffile.com. Or catch up with him on Twitter or Facebook. There's more Stuff File coming your way in just a few moments.
Here's a brief word about our show and my book. If you become a regular Patreon patron of the Stuff File program, I'll give you an e-version of my book, Great Conversations, My Interviews with Two Men on the Moon and a Galaxy of Stars. It's easy to do. Just go to patreon.com and become a patron to help make this show an even bigger and better radio experience. So, join Patreon and claim your copy of Great Conversations, My Interviews with Two Men on the Moon and a Galaxy of Stars. Sign up at patreon.com/The Stuff File program.
This is the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder. This broadcast is coming to you from upstairs. Get out of the house.
And still to come on the program, Marc Hartzman from WeirdHistorian.com will be up. Plus, we do indeed have an Idiot of the Day. And we have one more Stuff File news story, and here it is. CEO Kenneth DiGiorgio of First American Financial Corporation faces an assault charge stemming from an altercation that began when his wife asked a barefoot dancer at a cruise ship cocktail lounge to wear shoes. The incident escalated when DiGiorgio allegedly choked the man in response to him disrespecting his wife. Basically, he gave her the finger. This incident occurred in international waters near Martinique. After the dust-up, the ship's captain instructed DiGiorgio to stay in his stateroom until the ship arrived in Puerto Rico the next day. FBI agents in Puerto Rico tried to interview DiGiorgio, but he declined to provide any answers. Cue up Zohan again.
Smell it, smell it, smell it. Now take it. That's for you.
And let's get to our last guest here in this edition of the Stuff File program, shall we? Marc Hartzman, the curator of WeirdHistorian.com, is back with a weird story for the month of April. He joins us via Zoom from New York. And Marc, it would seem that the idea of UFOs almost predates the idea of human flight.
Yeah, it does, actually, just by a few years. This story is from April of 1897, so just about around 6 years, I think, before the Wright brothers first flew. And this was a story that took place in Aurora, Texas, where it was believed the Martian airship had crashed and a Martian body had been found and then buried. But let me back up just a little bit before that. This is actually part of a broader story of airships that was called the Great Airship Flap of 1896 and 1897, which started in November of 1896 with some sightings around the San Francisco Bay Area and Sacramento of these strange airships just flying by. And there were reports that they had these kind of egg-shaped with little fans spinning and apparently some people on them, searchlights, just strange things going about 20 miles an hour. And there's newspaper stories written about these. And it just started taking off. And more people across the country started seeing these airships over the months that followed. And there were certainly cases of hoaxes, people just jumping on the bandwagon, making up stories about going on airships and drawings of these airships that they were making up. And the whole thing just got really bizarre, but it just kept going and going, really spreading across the country over the months until finally we get to April and Aurora, Texas. The term UFO wasn't around back then, but no one was thinking that they were from outer space at this point. They were just curious things, what's flying. I mean, this was also before like flying Zeppelins, but there were some experimental aircrafts happening around that time. So maybe people were just thinking that this was something new, a new invention that maybe was still waiting to get a patent or be more publicized. There was just a lot of curiosity and uncertainty. But this particular case in Texas, the incident when it crashed, it was reported by the Dallas Morning News that this particular craft had mechanical difficulties and, quotes, collided with the tower of Judge Proctor's windmill and water tank, destroying the judge's flower garden. So that was a shame. And then the pilot, it described, its remains were badly disfigured. That was another quote. But it said, enough of the original has been picked up to show that he was not an inhabitant of this world. So, that's pretty shocking, right? And then it claimed a local astronomer, a guy named T.J. Weems, had declared that this visitor was a, quote, native of the planet Mars. And so this was a story that was out there, and supposedly pieces of this airship was found with mysterious hieroglyphics on it, and it was thought that pieces that were found were, quote, built of an unknown metal. So again, something from another world, apparently, I guess Mars. And then they had a funeral for the body the next day, and that was that. The body's gone, and that's what it is, right? So a strange, very early UFO type of story before, like I said, that was even a term. And then fast forward to 1973, the International UFO Bureau decided that they wanted to investigate this story. So by now, of course, we have lots of UFO stories, right? This is a few years after Project Blue Book closed. So there's lots of interest in UFOs, and especially picking up where Blue Book may have shut the book, closed the door. The International UFO Bureau attempts to exhume the buried Martian in Aurora. And they thought if they did that, they could get some of the unusual metal from his clothing or check out his bones. They want to go there with metal detectors over the site. And they figured if they could do all this, they could really learn something. They were pretty convinced that this is what happened back in April of 1897. And then another group called MUFON, which is the Mutual UFO Network. At the time, it was still called the Midwest UFO Network, though. They jumped in on the investigation. They thought that they found some aluminum alloy that didn't seem like it existed on Earth at the time. So again, there's speculation is building up again. And then they actually found some residents who remembered the event. So again, this was early 70s. They found a 91-year-old who remembered the crash. It said it caused a lot of excitement. Another one who was 98 who said they remembered picking up pieces of metal from the crash and telling stories of this dismembered body. So again, there's kind of some curiosity going on what actually happened in Aurora, Texas in 1897. And then a few years later, Time magazine actually wrote a story on this in 1979. And they found an 86-year-old local historian who said that the whole Dallas Morning News article was written, quote, as a joke to bring interest to Aurora. So she started to unravel the story. And she said that there was no Martian plummeting into a windmill. In fact, that this Judge Proctor didn't even have a windmill. So there's that. And the local astronomer was actually a local blacksmith who I guess just gave himself a new title. She basically said that this was a town that had once been prosperous and had some hard times. A railroad had been built nearby, and that caused people to just sort of bypass the area. So they thought, well, if we create this story, we could capitalize on this airship craze that was sweeping the country at that time. The idea of a Martian pilot was pretty exciting. This was also a time in history when there was a lot of belief and a lot of talk about intelligent life on Mars. Percival Lowell specifically was writing books and lecturing and newspaper headlines all the time about trying to contact intelligent Martian life and the Martian canals and all these stories. So there was a lot of those ideas and beliefs out there. So it wasn't totally out of the blue that they would just say a Martian pilot crashed there. It seemed like that might be something that was actually possible. To me, what's really interesting about this case in particular is this was, again, April 1897. UFO crashes is a story, right? And then they're thinking that this can become a tourist attraction, embrace a story, revitalize the economy. It's very much a precursor to Roswell, which was almost exactly 50 years later.
Now, I'm just curious because at the time, and as we said at the introduction, it kind of predates human flight. We are now used to the idea of things flying around in the world and even going beyond our atmosphere. But back then, no one ever saw anything that wasn't living, like birds, fly. So in describing something that was flying that was not of nature, was that something beyond people's scope at that time? Because we didn't have anything to connect that with.
Yeah, for the most part, it was. There was some experimental crafts that were being tested for flight. In fact, there's a story from May 1896, so just a few months before the airship flap began, where an inventor was testing what he called the aerodrome over the Potomac River. This was an unmanned craft, as I recall, so again, it was very experimental, very early.
And
but there were some kind of flying machines, just not common by any means.
We did have, at that point, hot air balloons, correct?
There were hot air balloons, yeah.
Yeah, so there was something flying, but not something contained.
Yeah, what they were describing was much more, I'd say, mechanical and advanced. But this was also a time when there were lots of new inventions going on. You know, in recent years, you had had the telegraph, the telephone, X-ray machines. I mean, there were all these things kind of going on that made that period an age of wonders. The idea of a flying machine may have felt like, okay, well, maybe this is the next big thing that we're going to have. And you don't know, it's hard to know how much of this was just, people imagining things. Maybe they wore hot air balloons with some extra things on and people exaggerated what they were seeing. And it became these illustrations in these newspapers that just took off,
Again, you are aware of all this because you write the books. As a matter of fact, we should mention that this particular story comes from a previous book of yours called We Are Not Alone, The Extraordinary History of UFOs and Aliens Invading Our Hopes, Fears, and Fantasies. So you know about this, but the general population does not. I'm just wondering, as a conspiracy theory, that the people of Roswell, New Mexico did know about this and decided to make that story their own in a modern way 50 years later.
That's a good question, how much they knew about this particular story in 1947, or if it just kind of played out in the same way. Roswell's actually kind of interesting because in 1947, when the supposed UFO crashed, it was a news story for a few days. This was the whole story where the Army actually said that they had recovered a flying disc, and that was like the big headline. And then the next day they said, oh, actually it was a weather balloon. And never mind, basically. And that was in the press for literally maybe 3 days or so, 3-4 days.
Right.
And then that story goes away basically for 30 years. There's lots of other UFO stories, absolutely, to this very day. So there's no shortage of UFO stories, but Roswell in particular really kind of just, wasn't a thing until 30 years later when it started being investigated again. And lots of interviews were being done. Then you have people remembering what they saw from 30 years ago. Eventually, the government came out and said it was Project Mogul, which was actually a high-altitude balloon that was being meant to spy over Moscow to check on their nuclear program. I mean, it was so top secret that they essentially decide at that point, let's just say it was a UFO instead of saying that we have a high-altitude balloon that we're trying to spy over Moscow with. And they were using new materials at the time as well. So people were seeing things that were unusual. And people will debate whether or not that's true or not, or if the Air Force is just making that up to cover it up still. Obviously, this is controversy that people can debate on back and forth. But Roswell wasn't really embracing the crash until decades after the fact. And now, I was there a few years ago, and it's the whole town. I mean, it's embraced it. You've got alien heads on every lamppost down Main Street. The Dunkin' Donuts has a giant alien holding up its sign. The McDonald's is shaped like a UFO, like a flying saucer shape. Every business has kind of embraced the UFO theme there, which is quite fun. It does make it a tourist attraction.
Well, again, this was in your book, We Are Not Alone, and I'm just curious to know if you uncovered any information of this particular area still not necessarily clinging to the story, but if there are still remnants of the story in that area today.
As far as I know, that grave is still there. They were not allowed to exhume the body. The Aurora Cemetery Association blocked the exhumation and prevented them from actually digging something up. So as far as I know, it's still there. People could probably still go there and pick up a bit of the story, which would be, I'm sure, quite interesting to see where a supposed Martian was buried.
Or they can just get your book, We Are Not Alone, The Extraordinary History of UFOs and Aliens Invading Our Hopes, Fears, and Fantasies. Correct?
That's always great, too. Absolutely.
Marc, thank you very much for sharing our weird story for the month of April. Looking forward to what you have for next month.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Marc Hartzman, the curator of WeirdHistorian.com and also the publisher at CuriousPublications.com. He's the author of several books, including the book that this story comes from, which is called We Are Not Alone, The Extraordinary History of UFOs and Aliens Invading Our Hopes, Fears, and Fantasies. His most recent book, co-authored with Dan Meyer, is called To the Hilt, A Sword Swallower's History of Sword Swallowing. You can go to our website at thestuffile.com, check out the show number for this program, which is show number 0817, and you'll find the links to Marc's sites, plus also links to either Amazon.com or Amazon.ca, where you can order his books directly. You're listening to the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder. And now, boys and girls, it's that moment you've all been waiting for. It's time now for the Idiot of the Day.
And now it's time for the Strange Things Adults Do. This Stuff File presents the Idiot of the Day.
This is just another moron thwarted by social media. Crush Comics in California's Castro Valley was burglarized on March 22nd. Owner Josh Hunter said the thief took a display of the store's most valuable comic books. He figured they were gone for good, but then, just 12 hours later, one of his employees stumbled upon an eBay listing for a very specific comic book from the store. Said Hunter, "I'm just going to buy that and see what happens." When he got the seller's name and address, he searched on Instagram and saw the burglars offer to buy, sell, or trade Lego sets. Next, Hunter called another comic shop and a toy store that had also been broken into and shared his findings. When the sleuths turned their results over to police, Alameda County Sheriff's officers served a search warrant at the home of 29-year-old Nurullah Amari, where they found tens of thousands of dollars worth of comic books, collectibles, and Lego sets. Amari was arrested on March 27th. Now, why, oh why, would you burgle comic shops and toy stores only to sell or trade them online for all to see? One reason, and one reason only: you're an idiot!
Gee, I'm only a kid, but even I know you're an idiot.
And that's it for this edition of the Stuff File program, number 0817. Hope you enjoyed it. The website is thestuffile.com. And once again, stuff is spelled S-T-U-P-H, where you'll find information and links on all of our guests by going to the weekly Stuff File page. Just look for the corresponding program number, and once again, that's 0817. Email me at peter@thestuffile.com. You can also find me on Facebook, Spoutable, Mastodon, and Blue Sky as PA Holder. Check us out on patreon.com, where you can become a patron of the program. Hope to see you back here for our next show on the air, online, or as a download. We're coming to you from everywhere, including KDXRadio.com, over the air on World FM in New Zealand, WLSL-LP FM in Dade City, Florida, KZZH-LP FM in Eureka, California, CKUW-FM in Winnipeg, CFMU in Hamilton, CKLU in Sudbury, Local 107.3 FM in St. John, CHSR in Fredericton, and also streaming on just about any streaming service your little heart desires. That's it. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder, a presentation of Flying Fish Communications. Please remember that in just 2 days, tomorrow will be yesterday.